Well, thank you, Lauren, and delighted to have everybody here with us for what I hope will be a fascinating session on the important issue of putting people into strategic planning. To discuss this, we have delighted to have Jennifer Colosimo from the FranklinCovey Enterprise Division, President of the Enterprise Division, and she has a very extensive career which is relevant to this. FranklinCovey, as you may know, is a global leadership company, and within that, as President of the Enterprise Division, Jennifer is responsible for six direct offices and in partnerships with 70 global licensees around the world. Jennifer has been recognized as an outstanding women in business by the Denver Business Journal, and she's served on multiple nonprofit boards. I'd like to mention that she's also a published author, so she has co-authored Great Work, Great Career with Stephen Covey himself, and that focuses on finding your voice and applying it to meaningful work. And she's also author of a research-based book, Strikingly Different Selling. I look at six things that differentiate consistently successful sales professionals. What we'll be drawing upon is not only her books, her published work, but also her experience as a leader within the Franklin Covey organization. So I'm going to invite Jennifer to join us now. And perhaps, Jennifer, you could introduce your business, perhaps tell us something about its strategy and your history within it. Over to you, Jennifer.
Thank you, Richard, and thank you to you and the Strategic Management Society for having me. As you mentioned, Covey is a global business that focuses on people and organizational performance. And people always say, well, what exactly is that? We look at our clients, we sell B2B, we look at our clients' strategies and say, what part of that requires people? In particularly people to change behavior. It may be they need to be more collaborative. They need to be more effective in giving feedback, first level, mid-level, executive level leaders. And then we deploy that, depended on what the client needs and their size, we deploy via, it could be sessions like this on Zoom or Teams. It could be live in person. It could be that they have people that help facilitate, and we have a platform that deploys when it's really large at scale. So we work on people challenges. We've been around about 40 years and we have a global footprint. Everything's in 24 languages. Personally, I joined Franklin Covey after several years at Accenture. I was a consultant at Accenture and joined to help with an acquisition and have been here twice. So one round, multiple roles, everything from sales to operations to consulting to customer success to order to cash and IT implementations. I left and worked for a Fortune 200 healthcare company and also did some private equity backed consulting, and then came back and lead our division, our largest division.
Great. That's a very broad experience. Thank you. Now, Franklin Covey advises on the people part of strategy. Can you just, in a nutshell, tell us something about Franklin Covey's own strategy?
Yes, and I think all of our attendees today or listeners later do some part of this. So hopefully adding some value that may be a little differential. First, we of course scan the market. What's the total addressable market in a specific geography based on certain criteria? What are our customers saying? And also, what are people who are not yet our customers saying when we don't win a particular engagement, or if we're targeting a market that is different than what we're currently in? So we do the scan and we hear from our first level individuals what they're hearing in the market. We do a lot of research and participate in groups like these and in roundtables. So you've got this picture. And hopefully, we're using, we do, AI to take those huge data sets and say, what does that say, as well as our own human intelligence. Once we've got that, and maybe this is differential for some people, we categorize. So we say, and we use the word stroke of the pen, meaning what strategy, what part of the strategy could two or three people, small group do because somebody says, let's do it? So examples of what might be in the stroke of the pen are we're going to have a different capital structure. We're going to acquire a company. Strategies that you can just do if you have the background and the budget for it. This doesn't require, in my opinion, groups of people, right? Stroke of the pen.
Mm.
On the other side of kind of a two-sided, what is continuous improvement? And it requires some change from people behaving differently, but it's just a continuous improvement. We're going to be faster on days sold outstanding. We are going to launch this new product, and the product team's working on it, and there's a
Mm.
change process, but it's continuous improvement. And then in the middle, what are the strategies that actually require immense focus? It's kind of at the intersection of if you don't spend a lot of focus on it and people don't change behavior, it won't happen. And those are the strategies that we focus on in terms of what does it require if there's change to make happen. So we categorize and then
Yeah.
we prioritize. Where are you going to put your capital? What do you think you have the internal capability to do, or you would need to hire or acquire? What can you do within a set time frame? I don't think you can have a lot in that middle category and that they actually happen. And then also personally, what aligns with your organization's distinctive contribution? I work with a client that their contribution is to diversify. They own lots of different companies, but they bring that operating model in. We, of course, want to align with our mission of enabling greatness, however that's defined in that
Mhm.
organization. And does it align with us? Would it make sense for us to do that from our brand standpoint? And then once we've got that whole prioritization process, and I'm sure we'll talk about how we involve people along the way, particularly in the
Yeah.
middle category, that's what we launch. And then I do think you have to be agile in adapting.
Right. Agility, we'll come back to agility as well. There's a couple of other themes I'd like to pick up, perhaps the AI one. I noticed Jonas has made a contribution in the chat, a number of issues raised there. Some of them I might ask Lauren to respond to. Please do use the chat, people, everybody who's listening. Um, so Lauren will respond to some of these. I think one issue that Jonas does raise that might be worthwhile having when you do your categorization
Yeah.
and when you do your prioritization, it might be controversial. How does that get what process do you use for resolving the controversies? And also naturally, especially when you've introduced issues from the front line, how do you manage that process of it of disappointing certain expectations and so on and so forth? Do you have any particular procedures, ways, methods that you typically use?
It's a great question, Richard. So when you say controversial, are you thinking there's obviously I'm in a public company, but whether you're in private equity backed, academia, there's
Hmm.
different stakeholders.
Yeah.
So controversial from your shareholders, controversial from the other people you work with, controversial from a customer standpoint. Um, Obviously, in the environment that we're in, sometimes there are also socio-political controversies. So
Yeah.
when you think about it, where are you really thinking? Controversy.
I was thinking internal, but you're quite right, Jennifer, to raise all the various possible sources of controversy. You all, you've gone through a lot, so you've seen a lot. Thank you.
Yeah,
But internal controversy, when issues are coming from the front line, expectations are raised. How do you manage the prioritization of some projects over another or some initiatives over another?
that's a great question. Number one, I personally, maybe other people have found a different experience. I never have done something that or started to execute on something that made every single person happy.
Yeah.
I just, I would love to have that experience in my lifetime. So, Richard, let's talk later if you think I can figure that one out. Um, so knowing that,
Yeah.
I do think that it's really important from a strategic standpoint that you, especially when it requires people, you
Mm.
remain in dialogue and
Yeah.
don't just say, okay, we're doing it, we're doing it, we're doing it. It may be that you are, but what I've found is if you keep your curiosity high and people say, our group wants to talk to you or this individual about all the things going wrong with this, or why we shouldn't do this, but we should do that, I find it always worthwhile to listen and
Yeah.
not in a manipulative way where I'm going to fake listen, but also, is there something there that was missed? Um, is something happening that I'm hearing from pockets, sometimes all over the globe, and you hear it enough times and you think, okay, can I talk to you and to you and to you? What is happening? Why is that happening? I think the dialogue don't dictate as much as possible. And then secondarily, what are you measuring on your way that
Mm.
you could adapt? I think about strategies of your organization has many airplanes in the air and they're supposed to
Yeah.
go from A to B. And some hit turbulence and they land in a different city, they're in C. Some get grounded. And hopefully, if you've done this process right, sometimes you are getting A to B, but maybe not on a direct path. So I do think it's always worth listening and frankly being willing to adapt when you have the information, whether qualitative or quantitative, that it's time to move a little bit this way on the flight path.
Yeah, I like that. Not phony, not fake listening, but authentic listening and looking for patterns, picking up clues and seeing whether they cohere into something. I like that. And the airplane analogy is a nice one. Some of the all the planes will land safely in the end, of course, but that's a good
It
one.
just depends
Now,
on what city or if they ever
yeah,
took off.
don't
Yeah.
want diversions. Yeah. Now, old friend of mine, hi, Luciano. Hi. Somewhere in California still, I think. Um, Luciano, you ask a couple of questions, one of which will take me back to something you said earlier, and then I would like to pick up possibly particularly Luciano's third question. But Jennifer, if you can see them,
Yes,
um,
I can.
please do take what you like. You mentioned the use of AI early in the strategic planning process.
Hmm.
I would love to hear more about how you use it, and if you can, indicate the kind of insights that it's generated for you in a way that you might not have easily got before. That would be the first part of my
Okay.
question. And maybe, to be fair, a second question would be, in particular, Luciano's question, how is AI impacting the Covey business in a
Hmm.
direct way, as well as part of its strategic planning process? So why don't
Understood.
you start with the first question, the planning process and AI?
In terms of where we are, and this has happened over the lifetime of my career, we have more data, more information. You know, if you just
Mm,
think of all the places, we work with a variety of industries, almost every industry, all the information I could get on one industry, let alone what I could get on what is customer usage, what are the massive impacts, what's our NPS score,
mm,
how is our gross revenue converting to net, right? There's so much data
yeah.
that my belief is one, and maybe considered naive, but I believe that one of AI's best usages is taking large data sets, whether written or
Yeah.
actually all the data that you can gather, and bringing it together into what does it conclude out of this. And
Right.
it's not that we're, as humans, not attending conferences. It's not that we're not listening to experts like in this sort of forum, but it is nice to say, okay, we've kind of come to this conclusion. What do you, proprietary, locked data set
Mm.
for our organization, come up with? Um, my belief is that the best use case for AI is ensuring that it really pushes forward human capability. That there are
Yeah.
things that uniquely humans do. And of course, there's fear because there used to be elevator operators, there used to be foam plug or buggy riders. Some jobs will change or go away, but I think that if it can empower us to do our uniquely human components. So, to the second question about how's it impacting, we're a consulting company. We're focused on people behavior. There's a couple things that is happening. Number one, right out of the pandemic, um, organizations moved to forums like this,
Yeah.
right? For both how they learned behavior, how they did coaching, and so on. And that has continued, especially if you have a geographically dispersed group that is wanting to save costs by doing it this way. But also, people are hoping for more human interaction. Having said that, in our deployment platform, we do have an AI coach based on our corpus of content. So
Mm.
you go in and you ask it questions. It would say, so Richard, what's your role? Where do you work? What are some of the challenges you have? And then you could put in, I'm going to have a difficult conversation with a colleague that I'm doing research with.
Mm. That's
Here's the
real.
issues. What are some best hints and tips that you would give to me? So it's based on our corpus of content. We have an issue where there is a lack of trust in our department or in our group, and I'm probably part of it, but I need to know how would I rebuild trust. Having said that, that's good in the moment, and there are multiple competitors out there doing this. If you think of an
Yeah.
AI coach to do coaching, and there is something, at least we're finding right now, where clients do want that as a supplement to some level of personal human interaction and not just interacting with your computer. And I mean, frankly, I'm seeing differentials in generations as well.
Yeah. It's the younger using it.
Yeah,
The very young. I was a colleague of mine said that her daughter, aged 23, was already not AI native. Do you remember the old phrase of digital
yes,
natives?
digital natives.
Her younger sister, aged 15 or 16, was because she was playing generating images all the time.
Yes.
And the 23-year-old was locked in a different generation, which was
Can you
somewhat
believe
daunting.
that? Can you believe
Yeah.
that? And my youngest daughter is, I have two, but my youngest is 26. And in the role that she master's degree in computer science and design. She's had to really, since she got out of school, learn a whole different way to do her profession.
Yeah. It's very, very exciting but challenging at the same time. For almost everybody in their 20s onwards, it sounds.
Hmm.
Okay, so my takeaway from that was largely that you see AI as a supplement, as in the strategic planning process. It helps check that you've been comprehensive. It looks for gaps. It gives you ideas, but you're still as it were, in charge. And you'd say the same, I think, for the more consulting part of your business when you're advising companies. It's a useful complement, but not a substitute. Is that right?
I
So
mean,
Luciano put the question, and I'll see
yes,
yeah.
Luciano, that is currently where we are. I mean, if you think of AI adoption, most organizations are in the early stage, right?
Hmm.
There are things where there are becoming agentic agents. Um, meaning I could give an agentic agent that's in pilot right now all of my information, every piece of my information, and say, find me a flight.
Yeah.
Find me my flights, find me my hotels. When it's agentic, it actually books it. And I'm not quite ready, but I'm just saying I do think it will evolve, but that's where we are right now in the
Yeah.
industry. You can get coaching that is completely AI. And we do group coaching, individual executive, in addition to a bunch of large group things so that you're building a high trust, inclusive culture and also executing on strategy. I'm not ready personally to be coached via AI, but I can also see the idea if you want to offer coaching at all levels of your organization and you're looking at a differential investment.
Yeah. So that's essential to the FranklinCovey business model. That might allow us to move on to the next question because AI is not making coaches and other people within FranklinCovey redundant yet. But so it raises the issue of who do you include in the strategy process? When do you choose to be more inclusive on what sort of issues? And when perhaps you call a halt and say it has to go back to the decision makers. How do you include the people in the strategic planning?
As I mentioned, I think even though it's not called strategic planning,
Yeah,
as a leader, whether you just have a team or you have a whole organization, you should be thinking strategic planning in all of your conversations. When something comes up about a customer issue you're hearing, or why we're not doing well in a particular geography. As you know, around the globe, there are different needs for the
yeah,
way that solutions are used. So I think you should always be thinking about it. Formally, particularly when I'm talking about those middle strategies, they're new, they require a change in behavior. Um, I think they should be included as early as possible. So it may be that no matter what, you are going to launch a new product. You are.
yeah,
But when you get to, okay, so there's specific functionality, what gets included, when should we think about launch, what kinds of changes need to happen? There can always be small focus groups. There can be, will you be on the change council? You can be very, very intentional if you have a product team and say, we're going to do a hackathon. Come up with
yeah.
whatever you can come up with in the next. So I think always the how when you're needing to change behavior and what are we going to measure on the way? What will be indicators that we know we're driving to success? That always requires people from an execution standpoint. Um, One last thing here, maybe many of you have had this experience, but you create this beautiful case for change to communicate and a communication plan. Here's
Yeah.
why we're doing it. Here's what it means for all of you. Here's either the risk for the organization if we don't do it, or the great opportunity, which creates opportunity for you. You have this beautiful speech, all your written documents. You're going to do town halls all over to take questions, and people will say, yeah, great, that's good. And then they don't go back and do anything different. I think if you're going to get the plane from A to B in some time frame, they need to be involved in what would early indicators be? What do you need to do differently? There has to be a real focus on change versus I'm going to announce the strategy and they'll do it.
Right. That feels very close to my own experience. So the key thing then is involving the people in the how and the selection and commitment to metrics and tracking actual changes against those metrics.
Yes.
So people must be involved in those sorts of things. Good. And the comms plan, however beautiful the deck might be, is far from enough. Yeah, yeah,
Yes.
communication, 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 but not
Right.
enough on its own. Robert from Hong Kong. I think it's quite late at night for you. You have a question which I think is relevant, particularly relevant, of course, here. From your experience, what is the one thing senior executives are not doing that they should be doing with regard to putting people into the planning process?
Um, well, of course, I meet spectacular executives. While I work for a leadership company, I think that's not something you can ever, some do, but I don't think you can declare expertise. You have to always say, I'm continuously learning. So I learn a lot from others. Having said that, one of the things that I see is number one, what we talked about, but I'll give another one where they think they've been in board meetings. They've been in meetings with customers. They've been in with the executive team. They have talked and talked and talked and talked about this and looked at data, and they get all the why and all the things behind it. And they really then think, this is so exciting. I just need to announce. And all of a sudden we'll develop this new market and don't think about what the execution of that needs to be. And then here's my second one. People are people. So you may have a strategy, but it threatens somebody's role. If you do that strategy, what happens to me or their department or
Yeah,
their, and I think that senior executives often lose sight of the fact that if there is a level of transparency, respect, trust, you will go faster and you will spend less money doing this. And if you ignore the human dynamics of executing on a strategy, I mean, we all have heard this statistic. This is the right group for this, that 70% and some say 90 of strategic initiatives fail. I think it's
yeah.
them recognizing the human in addition to just what is this great business case for this strategy.
Yeah, so this is another aspect of keeping people in the strategic planning, and another aspect, I suppose, too, that communications is not enough. As senior executives, one understands the logic, but one possibly underestimates the fear that some people may have as these strategies come down the track. I don't think I have any more questions at the moment, but please do keep the questions coming. Hope that helps, Robert. Um, the we had a discussion earlier, and that was about the negotiable and the non-negotiable. So we were talking about what's important in keeping people involved in the strategy, particularly the executive. I think this must be about where you draw lines. Is that what you'd like to discuss at this point on the non-negotiable?
Yeah, I think, when you're leading a group or a division or a whole company, you do frankly have sometimes insight that not everybody has, right?
Hmm.
You maybe if you're looking at an acquisition, you've signed NDAs to the nth degree. You can't talk about the possibility of this acquisition until it goes through, right? You have a variety of things. You may have decided from a capital structure, we want to make so many changes that we're now taking this public company private, or we've been
Yeah,
working on an exit for entrepreneurs. You have a whole bunch of things that, frankly, depended on your regulatory body or the agreements that you've made, you aren't talking about. And
yeah,
and I think especially newer executives, you see this saying, well, why don't we tell them? That whole thing is going to be solved in 3 months when this happens, right? And so that is some of the awkwardness of it, but some of those things are just not negotiable, not
yeah,
negotiable. You do need to integrate your technical platforms because your architecture's gotten out of hand and it's costing you millions.
yeah.
Not negotiable, even though there's a whole subset that loves the old system, right?
Hmm.
So I do think there are things that you can say, well, we can't have these disparate systems. I know you love the old one, but from a cost standpoint, we are going to integrate into this kind of architecture. And then you're looking at the change processes again. So I think the ones that are really not negotiable, but dialogue worthy are you have a strategy, and I'll use the plane metaphor again, and you're about halfway to the city, and you find out from your people, from your customers, it would make sense to divert. There are things that you can change in how it gets there, but there are just some things that are going to be disruptive, and it's something the business needs to do.
Yeah, and that's non-negotiable. I particularly liked your point about how, although much as we might want to, one wants to be open and one wants to generate trust and buy-in, sometimes, particularly in acquisition contexts, but also in others, it's simply not possible. So we have to have a sort of kind of check, a reality check on our idealism and our desire to be absolutely open. Now, Dean has asked a question which I think is relevant to what you were just talking about. The airplane is halfway from Denver to wherever, and
Yes,
you need to adjust. His question is it uses, and I have to kind of apologize this. Um,
I'm glad he's quoting you.
well, exactly. Somebody's read my book.
I love that.
That's really nice. But even here, the concept is not even mine. So there's a notion of emergent strategy that management guru and great researcher Henry Mintzberg
Mhm.
developed over the years from McGill, called emergent strategy. He argues that strategy is much less planned than emergent from your actual enactment of the strategy as you adjust, as you move, as you adapt over time, your strategy emerges, and you can see the logic retrospectively, at
Yeah,
least as much as prospectively. So when you look back, you see a pattern. So
I
does
completely
that is
agree.
that part of your experience? Can you respond to Dean's question?
Yes, yes, Dean, thank you. The emergent piece, I'll use another metaphor as you've mentioned. I live in the US state of Colorado. The we have whitewater rivers, right? Many I've been in other parts of the world on them as well. And at least earlier in my career, you occasionally hit one of those class 5 rapids. You just,
Yeah.
you'd occasionally think I can do this. And my experience, at least from the pandemic on, if maybe not earlier, has been there's a lot more class 5 whitewater. You just
Yeah.
barely get the boat steered and something changes. And we are all aware of many of the pressures we're having in our local geographies that may be outside of our control, but it's another whitewater.
Mm.
Um, I haven't had a year, I mean, maybe in the 90s, where you actually did a strategic plan and you worked towards that exactly all year.
Yeah.
Now, I do think you can choose a really critical, this has to happen, one or two, not
Yeah.
30, and really continue to work towards there.
Mm.
But even then, to the point that Dean makes, there's an emergent, okay, we're adapting this one piece. It's not following an exact plan. But
Mm.
frankly, um, I'm in the US, we had to change quite a bit in January.
Yeah. Of course. So what you bring back fond memories of going down the Grand Canyon with a long time ago.
Yes.
But with your whitewater analogy, what was how do you think a plan should be designed so it can adapt and incorporate? What key things, key elements in the plan will be important to allow it both to set a direction for the organization, but also to accommodate the white water, which you frankly again expect nowadays.
So think of any element of your strategic plan, and I am going to put aside those that right now are stroke of the pen. It's 4 or 5 people, investor
Yeah.
relations or whatever's going to do that. The ones that require a lot of people in your organization to make some shifts, you're looking standard if we're going to execute this in what amount of time, with what a kind of upside. with what amount of investment. And frankly, really important is, at least for what you know at the time, what are the key risks? So if this happens, what's my plan B? If this
Mm.
happens, what's my plan C? We have a really interesting, we have great board members at Franklin Covey, and one of them is Derek Van Beaver, who is at Harvard, and he also uses a lot of Clayton Christensen's work on the innovator's dilemma. He insists when you're presenting at a board meeting on a growth strategy that you outline every single, he calls tripwires, that you can possibly think of. What are the tripwires? And that you have some idea of what you would do if that tripwire comes up. So I really do think there's this agility to, okay, wait, we can't invest that. Or because this happened, that time frame happened and we had to adjust, you have to be continuously as an executive team or a leader, and you're making adaptations.
Yeah. So your plan should anticipate tripwires, as it were, develop playbooks for when those events, those tripwires actually do trip and emerge. They won't all or always, and be ready, as you used the word, but a couple of times already, to be agile in response to that. I like the tripwire analogy. That's very nice. Ballo asks a question, and I'm just going to maybe we'll take it briefly because we're, I think, coming towards the end of our time and have one or two more questions to ask,
Okay.
Jennifer. But Ballo asks about inclusivity in how do you see inclusivity versus diversity as the bottom line of his question? I don't know how you'd want to respond to that, and we might keep it fairly brief.
From and maybe this is good for strategic planning and for leaders, but my perception, my approach, as well as what we bring to clients, is move toward um, a diverse opinion. And what I mean by that is, as you think of change, you have people that will be early adopters, they're your
Mm.
go-to people. And I think it's dangerous to think that that is better than the resistor. I mean, eventually, in a for-profit organization,
Mm.
you do have to make choices. There's a point of choice. But an
Yeah,
initial resistor may have really fantastic ideas on how this strategy, their objections might be the best objections you hear. You don't need a lot of yes people. Now, I know if you're thinking about that's more of an inclusivity than a diverse point of view. Having said that, diversity also includes there are people that think differently, very deliberate, very scientific versus very empathic, is going to think about the people piece. There are people that have different skill sets. I can tell, we all know legal and IT and finance are going to see it very different than sales and marketing, right?
yeah.
And so, are you really getting a full view and moving toward at least initial resistors as opposed to saying, oh, we'll just talk louder and they'll hopefully come along with us,
I like that. So value the resistors, at least to a point.
at least to a point.
Yeah.
And again, like I said, at least in for-profit enterprises, at some point, there is a decision. This
Mm.
is the business model. This is what we're going to do. But people always have free choice.
Yeah. So we got a question about Alfred North Whitehead on process philosophy, which might be a little bit exotic. You can scan it and see whether you want to take it or not. We've gone quite academic here. Thank you very much for Teen. And there's another question from Frederick Ambani in Nairobi. Um, which is also related to this emergence in the sense of revision.
Hmm.
Um, and you might want to touch on that. There's one other last thing I would like you to talk about because you were
Okay.
very interesting about it as well in our previous conversation on the role of pilot projects. And I think that might link with Frederick's question about revision or the earlier question about emergence. That sense that you don't want to put stake everything and then go to, just bash on, keeping going in the same direction regardless. So the piloting also is another way perhaps of dealing with uncertainty and the need to revise as you go along. But you've got a question from Frederick, you've got a question from Dean, and you've got a question from me about piloting. I think some relationships, please take it as you wish, whichever you
Okay.
prefer.
Richard, so I'll start with your question, and then if you want to redirect to better hit what Frederick and Dean are asking, if I'm
Yeah,
not covering it, please
yeah,
redirect me. Um,
yeah.
so at Franklin Covey, I'll use an example, and also I have this from a Fortune 200 healthcare company, right, that has 60,000 people in global presence. Dependent on the risk, particularly. Or the fact that we might try this and it might not work because not everything works. In both cases, I've definitely had the experience of let's try this. And it's not even fully baked. So
Yeah.
at Franklin Covey, if you go back about a decade, and I know some have said their experience, our way that we worked with clients, you could say the business model
Mm,
had challenges. We weren't able to get the impact that the client desired. It was
mm,
an awkward interaction in the selling process. And we want to make the impact and we want it to be less awkward. And it also had an element of how predictable was our revenue. So there was a
yeah.
whole client business,
Mm,
and we knew from research what a shift would look like. But it
yeah.
also shifted your financials, it shifted so many things. And would customers agree that this was addressing the challenge they were having? Would this help us acquire new
Mm,
customers? And we piloted with a very small group. Hey, we're thinking we might go to market this way. Will you, in your next prospect conversations with your existing clients, see if this better meets their needs and how does it work? And we learned a lot in 2 years about pricing structure, about how changing this way now involved procurement and legal in different ways, things that people expect from customer success. And frankly, DaVita, the healthcare organization I worked with, has a whole group that works with the CEO that pilots things. Um, how to address comorbidities in the patient population, how to do this. They have a whole group that goes around and pilots.
Jennifer, that's really interesting. It seems to me, trying to link back to Frederick, that the piloting notion works as an interesting midpoint between a sort of rigid planning process where you project everything in some detail into the future with perhaps excessive confidence, and a purely emergent process where it's largely adaptable, too much adaptable, and where it's hard, at least prospectively, to see the logic, the ongoing logic. So I think the piloting idea is a really interesting one.
Mhm.
So thank you. I think we've covered a lot of ground. I hope, Frederick, that we managed to address your question to a certain amount. Um, I would like to thank Jennifer very much for a really stimulating conversation. I have several things that remain with me, will remain with me. Fake listening or phony listening. I think that was the phrase. I think that's a really important thing. Um, the leaders believe in the logic, but actually it's really hard for everybody else to understand it. Where things are non-negotiable, that's an important lesson. And I value the resistors to a point is another nice takeaway as well. So thank you very much, Jennifer.